At the heart of the failure so far of this SDG agenda is the lack of requisite financing. Requisite financing that has to come from international financial institutions, that has to come from developed economies that have promised to buttress efforts within the developing world in terms of meeting the 17 sustainable goals. When you talk about no poverty, when you talk about zero hunger, when you're talking about gender equality, when you talk about climate action, clean water and sanitation, strong institutions, peace and justice, these are all narratives within the Sustainable Development Goals, and to implement them, Bongiwe, you need the money. And this is what this political declaration that member states just adopted moments ago, all 193 member states agreeing for once at the United Nations that the efforts so far have not met the moment, and that the SDGs will only be implemented if they do what this political declaration says. Briefly, what does it say? It says we reaffirm our commitment to effectively implement the 2030 Agenda and its SDGs and uphold all principles enshrined therein. But it also deals quite wholesomely and voluminously with the issue of financing. It talks about official development assistance from developing countries, that they need to meet the 0.7% threshold in terms of their GDP economies. It talks about improved international debt mechanism to support debt review, debt payment suspension and debt restructuring. Of course, there's a big statistic running around within the United Nations system right now that some 3.3 billion people live, Bongiwe, in economies, in countries where they pay more on their debt repayments than they do on quality health and on quality education. So debt restructuring is a big part of this conversation, so that developing countries have the means within their economies to invest in these in the SDGs rather in refinancing or paying their debts off. And they also welcome, this political declaration welcomes the call from the Secretary General for an annual SDG stimulus to the tune of $500 billion. The question is, they've committed to this now. We need to see the numbers. We need to see the money go to developing countries, so that we can actually meet this moment within the next 7 years and implement the SDGs by that 2030 agenda, which is essentially a global deadline for everybody.
And Sherwin, we talk about that stimulus. I suppose the nub of it is always going to be the implementation. Is it going to reach those countries in time? Especially you think about some of the conversation about, the just energy transition, for example, this, as some of the countries have been crying about that. But there's something else, of course, that we look ahead to this week, and that is around yet another meeting between our President Cyril Ramaphosa, as well as President Zelensky. When is that expected to be, and is it a follow-up from the mission that we saw descend on Ukraine and Russia?
Yeah, I was told yesterday that the meeting wouldn't happen, and then later in the evening and early this morning we got news that the Zelensky bilateral with President Ramaphosa will be happening. We discussed this. We believe that this will be a follow-up to that African Peace Initiative with which President Ramaphosa led with several African heads of government and heads of state to Kyiv, to St. Petersburg, and part of the discussions, we understand, Bongiwe, is going to be focused on getting the Black Sea grain deal, which Russia withdrew from in July, getting that deal back on track. We understand there are some bilaterals planned also with Turkey's President Erdogan. We're not sure if the president will engage with Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of the Russian Federation, who will be arriving probably a bit later this week. He will be leading the Russian delegation to the UN General Assembly. But that's just, part of the president's program. Later today, he'll also be engaging with at a business roundtable hosted by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Of course, investment in South Africa's lagging economy, growth rates are not up to speed. The question of stubborn unemployment that simply is not coming down at the speed required in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals. So that is a very important interaction that the president will have, hosted by the Department also of Trade, Industry and Competition. And then we are also hearing rumors that there might be a pull aside at a dinner for heads of delegation that the US president is hosting tomorrow at the Met Museum. And there might be a pull aside, which is sort of an informal chat between President Biden and President Ramaphosa, not confirmed yet, but one understands that there are quite a lot of issues to discuss, particularly given the upcoming AGOA forum in South Africa, but also the aftermath of that judicial panel of investigation that found no evidence that weapons and ammunition were loaded onto the US-sanctioned Russian cargo ship Lady R in Simonstown last night. So lots of geopolitical discussions, lots of development issues. The president also talking a lot about the need for developing countries to find their voice in the broader conversations in terms of implementing the SDG. So certainly a lot to discuss here.